Hello, I'm Russ Berkowitz, and welcome to another edition of the Berkowitz and Hannah Love and the Law podcast. My guest today is Eric Stockman, one of the top trial attorneys in Connecticut and managing partner of the law firm Stockman and O'Connor that specializes in defending doctors and hospitals in medical malpractice cases throughout Connecticut. Hearing Eric's story should be quite interesting, since Eric, in addition to being an excellent advocate in the courtroom, is a guitarist and singer in a band, an accomplished golfer, and all-around good guy. Eric has been an adversary of mine for over 25 years. I've always respected his skills as an attorney, and I've really admired how Eric and his team has quickly become a litigation powerhouse shortly after they broke off from another prestigious law firm in Connecticut. So without further ado, I welcome Eric to the show. How you doing, Eric?
Hey, good afternoon, Russ, and thank you for having me on the show. Boy, that was some introduction.
So before having Eric tell us a little bit more about himself, I want to tell everybody about a story about how Eric and I met. So about 25 years ago, I had a case against a pediatrician in a hospital involving a young boy who sustained a profound brain injury as a result of an alleged misdiagnosis of a condition called bacterial tracheitis, which led to our client's airways shutting down. He was without oxygen for an unreasonable period of time, and he had a permanent brain injury. I didn't know Eric yet, but his office noticed the deposition of my client's mom, and Eric appeared at the deposition. And Eric can attest to this, but 25, 30 years ago, the lawyers, both on the plaintiff's side and the defendant's side, were sort of like old school gladiators. And so I was expecting one of these difficult defense lawyers, and then Eric shows up. And I didn't know what to expect from him, but Eric appears at the deposition. He starts asking questions, and historically, Eric doesn't take very long depositions. He gets right to the point. So it came out during the deposition that my client was a twin. And as I learned after the deposition, Eric's wife either was having twins or just had delivered twins. Well, we got to the point of the deposition that my client got very emotional, discussing about the challenges of raising her son, how the milestones that he was meeting were obviously not anywhere near the milestones that his brother was meeting. And suddenly I saw tears coming down from Eric's face in response to the emotion of the testimony. And right there, I knew that he was different than many of the other lawyers that I faced, who were very just stone-faced, didn't seem to really care much about the plaintiff or their injuries. And even though we have been professional adversaries all these years, every time I see Eric, I think about that case and I get very nostalgic about it. And to this day, it makes me realize that even though Eric and I are what we would call frenemies, Eric is a really good person on top of being a really great lawyer. And I'm really proud of knowing him. I don't know, Eric, do you remember that day in the case?
Oh, I absolutely remember that case. I remember that day. I remember your surprise at how I handled the deposition. I remember you thanking me afterwards for being so sensitive to your client's pain and to her story. So I absolutely remember that. And it's a moment in my career. I've shed some tears at other point in time during depositions, but that was one that stands out in my mind.
So getting back to you, why don't you share with the audience a little bit about your background? I figure I'd let you go through that versus me talking about it, and go through your educational background, your experience, and where it's taken you up to this point as a professional.
Sure thing. So I'm a Connecticut boy, born and raised. So this sort of factors into who I am, as the product of a divorced family and largely raised by my grandparents. So, I had their impact on me as opposed to my very young mom, who was 19 when I was born. And they were very religious people. They were very calm people, community-oriented, church-oriented, that kind of thing. And always were appreciative of the arts and of music and of education. So I was really instilled at a young age with that sort of work ethic and with that approach to my life and to my career. I went to some public schools when I was young, some Catholic schools when I was young. And then I went to Fairfield Prep, which was very instrumental in, sort of teaching me a couple things: how to write, how to think objectively and critically. And, it actually instilled a little bit of ambition in me because as a kid from a single parent household, I went to school with, other boys whose parents were congressmen and judges and doctors and lawyers. I must admit, looking around at the cars the kids were driving in the parking lot, and I had a 1969 Dodge Dart that I bought for $250. It definitely instilled a little bit of ambition in me. I went to the University of Connecticut undergrad. I taught high school for a year and a half in between college and law school. Worked my tail off in college. I needed a little time, so I taught political science, English, and world history at a private Catholic school called Sacred Heart in Waterbury. Coached football and track, and generally had a pretty darn good time doing all of that. And then went to UConn School of Law for my law school degree, and I graduated in 1994. So that's a little bit about, sort of my educational background. Mostly secular schools, a little bit of the nuns and a little bit of the Jesuits sprinkled in there. And, along the way, I don't know, I learned a lot. I must admit, I loved school. I paid attention in school. I read everything I could read, which I think serves me well as now I approach 60. It was a good time to grow up, and it was a good time to be an American. And certainly I benefited from both sides of the equation, both, the secular and the religious education.
Obviously, fast forward, we know that you went to the University of Connecticut School of Law also, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Why did you decide on law school?
As you know a little bit about me, I would have rather been a rock star or a baseball player. And I had done both. I played in college, but realized as I was getting on at UConn that I wasn't good enough really to do anything else with it. And so dropped that after a time. It was always my ambition to be a musician, but I had this sort of nagging, pragmatism that said, pick something that you could excel at. So I decided that the best way to combine the things I loved, writing, reading, talking, as you and I both know, I'm a talker, and competing, that the law would probably give me the best chance to do all of those things. And I must admit, years later, there'll always be that question in my mind as to whether or not I should have just given rock and roll a chance, without distracting myself with school or teaching. But, I can't argue. I've had the best career. I got the best job, and, I don't really have any regrets in that regard. So when I was picking a career, the law seemed to be logical, and thank goodness, it's proven to be both logical and rewarding for me.
Well, I think you made look, I'm not questioning your skill as a musician, but I think you made the right choice being a lawyer.
I tell people now I'm 58 now, right? So I was better at, guitar and when I was, 25, but I was always probably a professional quality rhythm guitarist who with a, wannabe singer. I think when all is said and done, I've excelled what I could have really done with music in the law. So I'm happy with it.
We may be jumping around a little bit before we get into your journey as an attorney, but you were in a band, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, that's something, when you're a guitarist as a kid, you join multiple different bands. We had a great law school band, believe it or not, with a couple of other guys who were really professional quality musicians as well. And then when I was a young lawyer, all the way through, being a partner at Newbert, Pepe and Monteith, we had a band, we wrote songs, we produced our own first CD. We toured up and down the East Coast. We played, tons of venues in New York, Elbow Room, Bitter End. It got looked at by a number of different record labels. But, to be a full-time practicing lawyer and then to spend Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night in New York City playing gigs proved to be challenging. And when my wife got pregnant with our twins, I decided it was time to leave. So that was 2001, I think, 2001. And so I retired from the band life.
And when we met, you were at Newbert, Pepe, Monteith, if I remember.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And it was probably around the time I had left music behind at that point. And 2001, 2002, something like that, Russ, I had been really doing things, taking depositions, trying cases, defending depositions, probably sort of beyond what a normal, I don't know, at that point in time was fifth year, sixth year, seventh year. And so I was lucky enough that our clients were throwing me into situations like, neurologically impaired babies at a time when other people probably weren't defending those types of difficult and expensive cases. So that's when you and I met at some point in time in the early 2000s.
And how long did you work at Newman Pepe Monte?
19 years, actually.
And I believe you started your firm what year?
2017.
And it must have been a big decision for you because I knew obviously a number of the people at the firm, at Newbert's office, and obviously I had a lot of cases with you, cases with Mike Newbert. Was it difficult for you to go out on your own? And what was it about being an entrepreneur that appealed to you?
It was difficult and it wasn't. It was difficult in that it had been brewing for a couple of years. There were a number of different, and again, none of this is meant to disparage anybody. When I made the decision, I felt it was just the best decision for myself, my family, and my clients and the colleagues that I was taking with me. But as you get older in your career and you sort of decide what what you want your legacy to be, and it was to a point in my career where, though I had good clientele and I had good autonomy within Newbert Pepe, I was, practicing good law. And let's face it, the compensation was pretty good as well. But I felt like there was more to be done. I felt like I was probably still, not receiving the kind of credit that I was due. And practicing at a firm at that point in time that was growing, probably we were 28 or 29 lawyers when I decided to leave, branching off in directions I didn't necessarily want to go. Medical malpractice was a staple at Newbert, Pepe, and Monteith, but there were other practice groups that were attempting to expand, like commercial litigation and bankruptcy and trust and estates. And we all necessarily weren't on the same page when it came to running a law firm. So it took some time, and it was difficult when I was trying to navigate all of those different interests and different thoughts about what it should look like. When I finally made the decision to do it, then it became easy. It was just planning and execution. Once the decision was made, in my mind, I was, all systems go.
And I had a similar experience as you. I mean, obviously I broke off I was a junior partner, and I believe I broke off when I was 37 years old and started my own firm. You obviously stayed with Newbert's office for a longer period of time, and you broke off a little bit later in life. But I think the experience was probably similar in terms of, how's it gonna be if I do leave, and am I gonna make it? Am I gonna be able to cover my people's payroll? I think we all go through that exercise in our mind when we're deciding when is the time to pull the plug on your relationship with your firm and move on to the next firm. And I remember speaking to you about, you had reached out to me at one point. We chatted about, what would be involved in leaving. And I had no doubt that you were going to be successful. You had a following, you had a great reputation. Your plan in terms of who you were going to take with you, who are all excellent lawyers. It seemed to me that with your background, your restlessness, I would call it, to be your own boss and do things your own way, just as I did, in earlier years. I think that from what I could see as an outsider looking in, it was certainly the right choice for you and the people that you aligned yourself with. And as I said earlier, when you look through Connecticut, and I'm not trying to patronize you, I mean, you're right up there as one of the top defense firms in the state. And in some ways, you're the future of the defense bar because your so-called competitors on your end of the bar, most of them are older and they don't have the same legs going forward as your firm does. And
I appreciate that.
And I'm just proud of what you've accomplished watching from the sidelines, even though I can't stand being against you. But as a competitor, I respect what you've accomplished, and your partner, Rich O'Connor, and all the other lawyers that you work with. You guys are a terrific operation, and you bode well for the bar and what you do.
Well, Thanks again. Listen, I learned my lessons from you and from a couple of other, people in the bar that I respect and admire. And, they didn't want to admit it, but I learned some lessons from Mike Newbert and Deb Monteith, his wife, Deb, two of my former partners. They often told their story about why and how they left Updike, Kelly and Spellacy. And it was a very effective move for them. And it came at the right time for them. As you can see, Newbert Pepe is highly successful. And, I wish them nothing but the best, going forward in the future. But I learned some of what needed to be done from them, to their dismay when I left. But I also learned it from other people. I did everything above board, as you know, everything according to the ABA guidelines. And I had the belief that it was going to be successful, because I knew the clients were coming with me and the people that I was taking were experts at this, game as well. A new partnership with someone like Rich, that was, there was a little unknown there, but he's such a great guy. And it turns out that we have a match made in heaven in that regard. We are accomplished medical malpractice litigators, but we get there different ways. And he is very much head in the books and medical records, detail-oriented, minutia-oriented guy, right? And really, that's what he wants to do in the world. And I'm more performative, as you know. And I really, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later on in the podcast, but I really run the firm. And unless he feels very, very strongly about something, he just generally says, you do it, I trust you. Sometimes I say, hey, I need you to tell me yes or no, just so that I've got your input on it. But most times I have free reign, basically. It's a benevolent dictatorship slash, democracy when we need to be democratic. And that's worked out well for us, at least to this point in time. I did think it was going to be successful. Once I decided we were doing it, then I wasn't going to let it fail. And it came with at a lot of cost. We had a vacation home. I had to sell a vacation home to fund the firm, and then the pandemic hit. There's no way I'll ever be able to buy back again, right? It's some of my former partners who weren't in on the decision and who, for one reason or another, felt better about my leaving. Those relationships, by and large, they haven't been acrimonious, but they haven't been repaired either, and they may never be repaired. Thankfully, I have a good relationship with Mike Newbert, and we're basically back to where we were before, because he was one of my mentors, and I was very close with him.
I was just going to ask you about mentors. Over the course of your career, have you had mentors that have made a difference in your career?
Yeah, well, yeah. Most of them probably at Wigan and Dana, at least in your formative years. I was at Wigan and Dana for my summer year and then my first 4 years as an associate. And you probably know all the people that I'm going to talk about. I worked extensively with Penny Seaman. We have different styles, but Penny taught me a lot about depositions and trial law. I worked extensively with Bill Doyle, who again taught me a lot about trial law. I worked extensively with Jack Dunham. He's not so much a trial lawyer as an appellate lawyer and writer, and Jack spent much of his time taking apart my writing and putting it back together to make it better. So those three probably I would cite right off the bat. Obviously, Newbert was a mentor of mine, although I got to say, it was, by the time I got there, I was in my 5th year, and he and I had a very similar approach to litigation. It was more like having a big brother than a mentor, more like having someone, that fit the same mold as me. And, generally we'd bounce things off of each other, and we generally agreed for many, many, many years on an approach to litigation. There've been outside people that I watch and learn from, including you. Rick Silver, I have to say, probably was one of the biggest influences on me. And I met him early on in my career at Newbert Pepe, and he took a shine to me for whatever reason, maybe because I stood up to him when other young people wouldn't. And so I got to watch him in dozens and dozens of depositions and at trial and learn from his strategies. I don't implement a lot of them. He's the 3-day deposition taker, then I'm the 2.5-hour deposition taker, because I know what I want and I go in to get it. Rick had a different approach, but I learned a lot from him as well.
I learned a lot from Rick also. Rick actually, whatever reason, took a liking to me also, and he used to send me actually real med mal cases that they had a conflict with, not just garbage that sometimes people will send other lawyers when they just want to get the case out of their hair. But Rick is a special guy. He's 90 years old now, and he was amazing. The one thing I learned from Rick and this is pre-computers, Rick used to tell me, you have to look like, to make the case look big, you need to bring in a lot of boxes. And they would photocopy the file over and over and over again. And the courtroom had just boxes of files. And it would make maybe the jury would think the case was more important. That's one of the things I learned from Rick. He was an amazing guy. And there's a lot of people that have helped guys like you and I come up over the years and make a difference in our careers. And I'm glad that you mentioned Rick, because he's one of those that have helped me. And I'm sure there are others that have assisted you or given you ideas on how to be as good a lawyer as you obviously turned out to be.
So yeah, no doubt. You have to pay attention, to everybody in our business, and be a little bit, you have to absorb the various techniques. I forgot to mention one person, which by the way, I just have to mention, and that's Gary Mulcahy. And you and I know Gary well. She, in my mind, was one of the most effective trial lawyers I've ever seen. And I had the pleasure of trying at least a half a dozen cases with her, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, because she represented an individual surgeon who had admitting privileges at Stanford Hospital. And I had the hospital, God bless them, was my anchor client for, 2 decades. And Gary and I tried these cases together, never lost a single case. And I got to watch her and her style, which is so unique, it can't be replicated. Gary was, 65 to 75 during this time frame. She was like your smart, sarcastic grandmother. She could get away with anything. And the jury didn't know what to do with her initially, but she would win them over with humor and sarcasm, and witnesses didn't know what to do with her either. And I learned, number one, I'm not Gary Mulcahy. And number two, I learned that you just got to be yourself no matter who you are. And if you try to be someone else, you're not going to be effective. So it was just an absolute ball to be her co-defendant. And I learned so much from her as well, on my feet in trial. Just fantastic.
And then as time went on, we actually tried a case against each other. And I actually did well in the case. It was a fairly large verdict. But before the verdict, throughout the trial, I actually thought I was losing, because when Gary went to trial, she took over the courtroom. She wasn't just someone there hiding or waiting her turn. For whatever reason, no matter what part of the trial it was, Gary was an issue. And I was saying during the trial, I hope that they don't really like her, because she's really taken over this case. I hope they're paying attention to me a little bit. And I got lucky with a nice verdict, but I remember Gary and I speaking after the trial, and I told her that she was a very formidable person. But she learned from a great lawyer also, Arnold Bai, who was all of 5'3", and he had a lisp. He was an incredible lawyer, and he would shake up plaintiff lawyers. And I had a deposition with him also early in my career. He objected to almost every question over 3 hours. After the deposition, I was just despondent. And he said to me, "You did great." I said, "I did great. I couldn't even get my client's name out." So she learned from a great lawyer. And I do believe that good lawyers usually learn from other good lawyers, whether it be somebody within your firm or someone on the outside of the firm. I didn't have the same benefit as you as far as having any trial mentors, but I would go over to the courthouse and I would watch Rick Silver, David Gall, and Michael Koskoff try cases when I was in my 20s. And I'm like and obviously you can't copy any of them. They all have their own style. But the running theme, and I'm sure that you feel the same way, it's all about the preparation. They all look very prepared. They all spoke, eloquently without notes. And that's where I learned. And I'm sure that you've got your own mentors in that way, as you've just mentioned. And it's an interesting journey doing what we do. It's a little crazy journey, right? I'm glad that I went into this field, and I'm sure that you're glad that you're in it too.
No doubt. I love my job.
Tell me a little bit about your firm. I mean, I know it's you and you have Rich O'Connor. You've got other partners, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love my partners and all the people that we work with too. Really, like, it's hard to imagine that you could find a better group than this, or that, a lawyer would be talking about how great their colleagues are, but we really have a special thing going here. So, in addition to Rich, who's 65, and, ironically, he was about 57 or 58 when we started the firm, and now I'm there, in the blink of an eye. I have 4, we call them the younger partners, and I still think they like being called the younger partners, but they're all in their mid-40s. Adam Mayako, Vimala Ruskowski, Sandy Russis, and Rebecca Brinley, and they are fantastic lawyers. They're all experts in their own right, as well as great people, right? And on a daily basis, we collaborate, we laugh, we strategize. It really is a great setup. And then we've got a ton of other really great partners and associates here. Melinda Munson, who is a nurse and has a lengthy career as a lawyer and also was the risk manager for Danbury Hospital. She's up in our Newtown office. Mike Rigg, who ran his own firm at O'Brien Tansky for many years and who is like a walking Lexus Westlaw resource. Guy can quote any case off the top of his head. He's a great appellate lawyer. Amanda Stephanatos, we got her from Ryan's office. We've got a great first year, Ashley Blair, who came from UConn, 2 first years coming in, one from UConn, one from Quinnipiac. Just hired a guy today. I don't want to tell anybody yet because he may not have told his firm. But we got a young guy, 34 years old, who's a partner at a New York law firm, but lives in Connecticut. So he's coming on board shortly. We're growing. We started off with 5 lawyers. I think we're now 12 and probably going to get bigger because we have to. Not necessarily because I want to grow a bigger firm. I like the intimacy of a smaller firm. But as you know, Russ, it's a tidal wave of work out there. And the plaintiff's malpractice bar and the defense malpractice bar in this state are growing smaller. So, yeah, we are getting bigger. I don't think it's going to break the culture of the firm at all. We just have a ball here. We really absolutely do.
Obviously, we're on the other side of cases, but I feel like our model is very similar to yours. And the thing about having a ball and laughing, it's such a sad business that we're in. Every one of our cases and cases that you defend, someone's either passed away as a brain damaged child, as a case where they failed to diagnose cancer and the patient's either dying or passed away. So without having that sense of humor and that ability to try to laugh, I think I'd end up at a mental institution. It's just it's a difficult business where every day you're talking about the saddest things in people's life. I hear you in terms of why you feel the need to laugh, because you want to cry and there's no in between in this business. So what do you do to get away from it?
So golf and guitar, you said that at the top of the show. After I think I probably stopped playing guitar for 5 or 6 years after the band broke up, and then my wife bought me an acoustic guitar and said, you really should pick this up. I know how much you love it. That was the longest time in my life I think I'd gone without playing guitar. I started when I was about 5. And so then I started, building up my guitar collection again and really playing, even if it's, I have a couple in the office, and even if I take 10 minutes every couple of hours just to strum one, it's a very good little outlet there. I play at night, play golf in the summertime, not as much as I want to. Once a week, maybe 9 holes at night if I can get out. But again, that's good me time. Family, obviously. I have 24-year-old twin girls and my wife, and we have a great time. They're still home. I'd like to get them off the payroll at some point in time. Right. But they're a delight. Right. And we laugh hysterically. My kids now get my sense of humor. It took a while, but I remember one of my daughters looking at me a few years ago and going, "Oh my God, you're funny." And I'm like, "Yeah, I've been funny for a long time. You just haven't noticed yet, So we have a great time there. I love to travel, but we don't travel enough either, given the constraints of running a law firm. I'm lucky, Russ. I've got good friends. Many of them still live around me. I've been blessed to know a bunch of people since I was like 5 or 6 years old that are still my best friends in the world. So that's a good thing as well, because they know, goofy old Eric, right? They know baseball Eric. They know, wannabe rock star Eric. They know lawyer Eric. I invite them to my trials. My buddies come to see me try cases. They break it down afterwards. They literally do.
They keep you humble.
They do. Absolutely, they do. So in that regard, there's things to do. The law is intense. You and I have both talked about this for years. The law is intense. It's all encompassing. It's not just a job, And even when you try to escape, it's hard to escape because these things are on your mind. Clients are relying on you. Your partners are relying on you. Your staff is relying on you. So you live it, right? But there's ways to grab life by the horns and still enjoy it outside of the thing we call a career.
I can see you're able to do that, and it's a good thing. It's especially difficult, as I'm sure you learned at the beginning of running your own firm, that not only do you have to maintain your skill level and busyness as a trial lawyer, but now you're running a practice. All that goes into that, such as, you're the guy that deals with payroll, you're the human resources guy, you're the marketing guy, you're the guy that doesn't put his away message on when they go away like everybody else because you get bombarded with 100 emails a day. So, I mean, and a lot of it are necessary for you to respond because you're the decision maker. So there's a lot, as we both know, that other people don't see in terms of it is a crossover. It is a way of life. You can't turn on and off like an employee who can just leave the office at the end of the day and they do their thing. We never stop.
Well, I definitely did. And you can't prepare someone, even I'm sure you told me this as well, right? You can't prepare someone for that, for the change in obligation, and for many years now, I've been wearing the managing partner hat and I've been wearing the lead, trial lawyer hat. And the managing partner hat is not that satisfying anymore to me. It was for a time because I took pride of ownership in the business and I was going to do whatever I had to do to and work as hard as I had to work to make sure that it succeeded. And that meant, as you just said, payroll, right? Paralegal stuff, secretary stuff. I mean, I did everything. I was my own legal assistant for a time, right? Monitoring every email, right? Everything, furniture, colors, logos, right? And then over time, as my young partners got their sea legs as well and wanted to take on a little more of the administration, I've doled a lot of that out. And then I think, this year, 2025, my role has really, really changed because we're in an era where the trials are coming faster and there are cases that have to be tried, whether we win or lose. There's statements that have to be made with some of these cases that we're just not going to pay because there's an outstretched hand. And the post-pandemic experience, at least from our end, has been, as I call it, defense verdict or disaster. So we're getting very significant defense verdicts on tough claims and difficult claims. But when we lose, we're getting killed in terms of damages. And that's dangerous. And the clients recognize that. So the clients are now moving to a scenario where they want me to try their cases, even if I'm not the one handling their case, whether it's internally here with cases that are with my partners, or, I just was asked and tried a case and, replacing another prominent law firm in Connecticut, sort of 2 months before trial, I was told, you're going to go try this case. We're going to send the case over to you. So that's taken me away from the managing partner duties. I can't do that because trial is all encompassing. I can't do that and run the firm. So I've really been handing off a lot of those responsibilities. We've got a director of operations now. She's fantastic. She's helping as well. And that transition is fully underway, although, as you probably expect, I'm still being bombarded with hundreds and hundreds of emails every day and still have the tendency to look at them whether I'm supposed to or not.
It's not an easy dance. It's, fortunately on my end, we don't have the same constraints in terms of who can work on cases. I know that some insurance companies or healthcare systems, they want you. Whereas on my end, I'm able to delegate certain cases out, especially, even large cases where you don't always have that luxury and you have to go from thing to thing. And it's it's a burnout type of thing to some extent, unless you're able to be unique in terms of everyone else. That's why you don't see a lot of trial lawyers 65 and older. They may be still lawyers, but they're not trying cases in the same amount as someone like you. They get to the point where enough is enough, or a long case. It's easy to try a case that only takes a week. A case that takes 3 weeks of picking a jury and 4 weeks to put on evidence, it's a lot, right? I feel like those longer cases in some respects are a young man's game.
I agree, generally speaking, although, I mean, I still feel like at 58, I'm fairly young.
Oh, just, I don't mean you. I'm saying there's that range in the 60s where things change a little bit.
Yeah, I just came off of a 7-week trial, basically just like you said, 3 weeks of jury selection, 4 weeks of evidence, and it was in Stamford, which, no matter what time you leave, is an hour and 15 to an hour and a half from where I live. And that was exhausting. exhausting because we're awake 14, 16 hours, a day working on these cases. You can't sleep when they're pending. And then to spend 2.5 hours in a car every day as well, trying to navigate the Fairfield County traffic. I mean, it's exhausting. I think I told you the story during closing argument. This is the very end of May. The Stanford courthouse didn't have any AC. Their HVAC hadn't been turned on to AC because it wasn't June 1st yet. And it was about 85 degrees during the day we gave closing arguments. And I was about, 2/3 of the way through my closing argument in an 85-degree courtroom, no air conditioning, standing on my feet. And I felt lightheaded, like I was going to pass out for a moment, and just leaned against the podium and thought to myself, you are not passing out, Stockman. You are not going down in the middle of a closing argument. And I just took a breath. I grabbed a drink of water real quick, and then composed myself enough to finish. But I actually thought I was going down. I really did.
I can see it. It can get tough. I mean, if it's the case I'm thinking of, it was against a New York lawyer, right?
Yes, exactly.
And that even makes it worse. Not to disparage lawyers from New York, but they're brutal when they come up to Connecticut. Weirdly, we're a little calmer up here in Connecticut. They're different. Let's leave.
We are. We're a little more collegial up here. While I've seen 50 plus trials, many people pull out all the stops in various ways and in trial tactics that I might look askance at. I've never seen anybody, I'm going to choose my words carefully. I've never seen the shenanigans that I saw during this trial from a Connecticut lawyer. It was hard. It's hard enough to try a case and listen to what the witnesses are saying and react in real time, but to have one eye on the other side to see, what crazy curveball they were coming up with next, that's, doubly, maybe even triply tough. But, we got a great outcome given the circumstances, and, I survived it.
If it's the case I'm thinking of, you definitely survived it. So that's a good thing. Just one more area before we close. Where do you see the firm's practice evolving over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, if you've thought about that? And what would you like to change either with the court system, the med mal field, in order to make things more efficient to handle the cases that we handle? That's a lot. That's a big question. So I'll let you with it.
Yeah. That's a lot. So in terms of the firm, listen, while I've always got an eye on the future, and I'm always thinking about, what's going to happen this year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, because, I want this to be a legacy. I don't just, I don't want the firm to come and go with me, and it won't. But I can't see, given the volume of work that we have, I can't see us doing much other than, the malpractice work. I can't do plaintiff's medical malpractice work. I do some plaintiff's work, as you know, in other areas for friends and family and whatever. It keeps me sharp, keeps me attuned to thinking like a plaintiff's lawyer, which helps me defend cases. So I'll continue to do that from time to time. But honestly, it's a tidal wave. Barring, crazy tort reform or a collapse of the hospital system as we know it, we're going to grow just because we have to do what we do best here. And so we've got an eye toward growth, measured growth. I don't want to grow for growth's sake, but, we just take a look at the volume of cases that our lawyers are handling and then decide, okay, it's getting to be critical mass again. We need to bring in another qualified body. And then, we spend the time and the resources to get that, and then we grow accordingly. So I just see us continuing to defend malpractice cases. I don't see us even trying to expand and add other practice groups. I mean, maybe we add somebody who sort of specializes in healthcare regulatory, or healthcare corporate. But even then, I'm not sure that we need to or that I want to. In terms of where I want to see the field go, I generally think that juries get it right. I'm not a huge fan of Connecticut individual voir dire. I think it could be sped up a little bit. It's in our the state constitution, so it's probably not going anywhere. Maybe a hybrid box system where, unlike the federal court where you pick a jury in, half a day, maybe we could do something more along the lines of New York where you get your panel and you can spend a couple of 3 days with them, the same 30 or 40 people. That would obviously cut weeks out of a medical malpractice trial. we commonly say that it's at least a day for every expected day of evidence. And in Stanford, it's 2 days of jury selection for every expected day of evidence. So, we spend weeks and weeks and weeks here picking juries. That's probably not the most efficient use of anybody's time. And I'm not sure that it makes a difference in terms of verdicts. Thankfully, I tell my colleagues and young partners, the cases that I've lost have typically come down to one juror going rogue and sort of taking over the deliberations. And I am thankful, although I beat myself up over it. In all of those cases, I'm the one that picked that rogue juror. So I have no one else to blame but myself. And that's after an hour, hour 15 of examining them, thinking that you might know what you need to know about them, that you've unearthed their biases and that you've got a good sort of feeling, the gestalt is good. And even then, we still make mistakes, which leads me to think that individual voir dire isn't necessarily the great thing that everybody in this state thinks it is. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're any more or less likely to win a case than you would if you just picked from a box for a day and a half.
I agree with you. I think that while we go through the process, a lot of times we think that we're the smartest person in the world and we're getting all this information to make a critical choice. But at the end of the day, it's a crapshoot. I'm sure you've had, like me, where you think that you've got a juror or two and they're nodding at you the whole trial and you're like, oh, I've got this one. And then they end up being the ones that blew your case out of the water at the end of the case. And so you just don't know a lot of times. And I think that the federal system, which takes like a whopping 2.5 hours to pick a jury, the results don't seem to be any different than ours that can take 3 or 4 weeks sometimes. So it makes me wonder also, like you, which is the most efficient way to do things. I do think it's helpful now that there's so much information on social media about people, that there might be a way to incorporate the ability maybe to get the names of the prospective jurors ahead of time so you could pre-screen them on your own so that you're not wasting an hour or two on each juror getting that information during the trial. That's my observation, but I think you've got it right. And obviously your results show that you must have good instinct in terms of who you pick as jurors because your results speak for themselves. And I think your firm is on the right track. I don't think things are going to change much. I know that there are some outside firms of Connecticut that have tried to put a footprint in Connecticut to expand their business. And maybe they've been able to do it a little bit, but they're not going to take away from a firm like yours where you and Rich have such a broad-based practice where you're always going to be in demand. And as your succession plan seems to be panning out with those great middle-aged lawyers, so you've got a successful formula. Anyway, I think as all good things must come to an end, so must we. And Eric, I appreciate your time. I'm blessed to know you as a friend and as an adversary, and I wish only the best for you.
And likewise, my friend, I appreciate it very much. It was really fun to be on your podcast. I know I will see you sooner rather than later. But as usual, we fight tough and fair within the lines. And then outside the lines, we can break some bread and have some laughs. And that's the way I want it.
Sounds like a plan.